epic. The word I would use to describe Dune Part 2 is epic. Like, we're talking, I'm thinking this is going to be most likely, almost certainly, going to be the most epic movie of 2024. If not the most epic movie of the decade. As in the 2020s, up to this point, at least. I don't know what's coming next. Like, there could be another Dune movie that could top this as the most epic movie of the decade coming in, I don't know, 2027 or whatever. We're not talking about that. We're talking about Dune Part 2, okay? I'm just going to go ahead and kind of rewind the clock a little bit to Dune Part 1, okay? My opinion on Dune Part 1, right? I watched the movie when it first came out, and I was kind of confused, right? I couldn't figure out, like, it was hard for me to process. I didn't really know what to think about the movie. I wasn't sure if I liked it or disliked it because, like, I was just trying to figure out what was all going on because there are so many words that are, like, unique to Dune, right? And so I'm just trying to process it all. I rewatched it, preparing for Dune Part 2. And it's a lot better. But the way I would describe the relationship between Dune Part 1 and Dune Part 2 is that Dune Part 1 sets the table. So in Dune Part 2, you feast. That's this movie. Dune Part 2 is the feast. You know, it's where you like you start to you're like getting all the learning done in Part 1. It's like you know, kind of setting things up. And then in Part 2, that's when it really drives in the story. That's when it really gets in the trenches of like the society of the Fremen and you know, you really get into some of the more some of the Harkonnen stuff, and you get into a lot more of that stuff, and then you get into the prophecy of Paul Atreides, or him potentially being their Messiah of the Fremen, and you have all of that, right? And you can really dig in, and you really get a lot of what I wanted out of Dune Part 1. What I was really feeling lacking was like it kind of almost skimmed the surface. I'm like I want to see more of the Harkonnens. I want to see more of the Fremen. I want to see more of this, and that's in Dune Part 2. That's where we really dig in and we really get to that. And like that is like, because it starts. It's Dune Part 1 stops where it starts getting good, and Part 2 starts right at that point. And it just, like, it is undoubtedly epic. Like, it is epic in scale. The cinematography is epic. The music is epic. I would describe the music from the first movie to be more ethereal almost. And this movie has some of that, but I don't remember like the soundtrack of movies very often. Very rare that I remember the soundtrack, and I'm not saying that I can recall tunes right off the top of my head. I've only seen the movie once, but what I am saying is like I was paying attention to when the music was big. And I think this is one movie that you definitely want to see in theaters because the big sound, like the sound, like what you're gonna get from like an at home just on a TV, it's not going to compare to the sound you get in the theater with like the speakers all around you and the big sound of like when you're feeling it in like in your body and whatnot. It's like, oh man. And the visuals, like I have some of those images burned into my retina. Like if you can see spoilers, right? No, just kidding. But it's like burned into my mind, right? Because I can easily recall several images, and they're just some of the more artistic images, stuff that you'd see off like a poster, just all scattered all across the movie. A lot of that really good, and the story, like you get, this is a much more mature story. Now, obviously, when I say mature, I'm not talking like inappropriate stuff, like stuff that's like I'm talking like stuff that children just can't process as easily, and not stuff like inappropriate stuff, like, you know, this is a PG-13 movie after all, it's not rated R. So this but it has like it's more complex far more like this makes, like, if we're talking sci-fi, and I know Star Wars isn't a sci-fi, but like if we're talking like sci-fi stories, right? This Dune feels almost more like Star Wars' big brother, right? Like Dune is the adult and Star Wars is the kid, right? Like, I know George Lucas keeps talking about how, Star Wars was made for 12-year-olds. Well, like, this is like the more complex fantasy stuff. So if you're looking for a new world, a new IP to dig your teeth into, right? And like you're looking at all the stuff that's coming out in cinemas, right? And it's like, it's just more juvenile, right? Like you have the MCU, and it's like, I'm not saying like most of these are like super juvenile and they're like really like kiddie, whatever. I'm saying like there's, like the MCU, for instance, which is really cool, right? It's cool, but it's also really like, it's fun, it's cool, it's kind of lighthearted. But sometimes you just want something more adult, more grown up, that takes itself more seriously. And that's Dune. And I recently put out, I think my last video was on The Witcher 3, and the world building in The Witcher 3 was phenomenal. And the one thing I really liked about The Witcher 3 storytelling, or The Witcher 3's world building, is that like it's super grounded, and like it goes to like the very base level of how things are done. Now, Dune doesn't get as nitty gritty as I've gotten in the Witcher series, especially in the books. Like the books gets like, I think there's a lot of little quirks in different and how different things work, that the books really get into. And I've been listening to the books, but like the world building, like it's really foundational in how it does this, and I feel like Dune really does this well. Now, I'm not saying, I wouldn't say Dune really gets into like the nitty gritties quite as much as the Witcher series does, but I still feel like this is a world where you feel like the Fremen feel like a society, right? You kind of understand how things work, and things are consistent, and it feels like it's an extra, like it feels like a different world rather than just some story somebody made up. In my Thor video, I talked about how like the like Asgard doesn't really feel like it exists outside of the story. This does not feel the same for Dune. So I really think Dune Part 2 is phenomenal. Should you go see it in theaters? Absolutely. I would say completely yes. You should make sure to see Dune Part 1 first before you do. Probably rewatch it. If you haven't watched Dune Part 1 recently, probably just give yourself a refresher. Then go see Dune Part 2, because it is utterly epic. It's 2 hours and like 40 some minutes. It is truly epic. Not the longest movie in the world, but it is definitely worth the watch in 2024.